Today's episode is brought to you by Apprentice Academy. Apprentice Academy is my audio production and engineering school based out of the West Barn in Nashville, Tennessee. We have a 16-week program that puts you in the driver's seat, totally immersed in the studio, learning techniques, learning technology, learning everything we talk about here on the podcast, which is how to get in a room and stay in a room, all the nuances of the music business. We love this program. It's a great time. We'd love to talk to you more about it. Hit us up at apprenticeacademy.net. There's a lot of information there as well as a contact. We have a 2021 fall semester starting the last week of August. We also provide virtual classes. So if you can't come to Nashville and participate with us, we've got a great virtual program as well. Reach out. We'd love to talk to you at apprenticeacademy.net. Hey, it's Joe West from the West Barn with
Mike Shimshack.
Today, we've got Candace Stewart on, industry veteran with over 30 years of experience in the recording studio management, meaning she runs studios, has been the keys to the success of the everyday running and getting things done in a multi-room facility. Not these like rooms like that most of us end up working in, but like giant rooms, like these rooms that are epic rooms. She's key to the revitalization and the running of what was cello, what was Western Recorders back in the day,
right.
And what before that, I understand, was a grocery store. Is that true?
It was called Cash is King.
Okay, so it was a grocery store, became, of course, Bill Putnam turned it into the famous Western recorders, and then it became cello, which was just another epic room, and now it's currently East-West. It's a 4-room facility, if my memory serves correct. 5-room, okay. And it's got
one tenant.
But it's one of these rooms. It's just like every room's got a beautiful console. They say, I was on the website today. It said our smallest room, and in the picture of it is like this console that goes on for days, So it's that level recording studio, which requires a lot of accoutrements, requires a lot of logistics to keep running. She's responsible for that over 30 years. She's also worked at other studios, and we're going to talk to her a little bit today about how when cello eventually went away, came back as East-West, and she was very in-depthly responsible for that. So please welcome to the show, Candace Stewart.
Oh, hold on one second. Hi, you guys. Sorry about that.
Welcome.
Yes, great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's a long and winding road, but basically where it really started, and I'll try to make this brief, it's hard, is that I have 3 older brothers, grew up in Charleston, South Carolina. They had a band. They were successful. They moved to LA. Their names are Rick and Steve Smith. My brother Steve is up in Seattle. He's a teacher and a studio designer. He's a mixer. And my oldest brother, Rick, also was an engineer and is a musician. He lives in Hawaii now. And Rick worked for Frank Zappa. They both did tons of records at the record plant. They got jobs as runners at the record plant on 3rd Street back in the late 60s, early 70s. And I would come out from South Carolina, from Charleston in high school and see them. My other brother, David, who's closest to me, he worked there too. And so I would come out, and I'm the only non-musician in my whole family. I'm the only person in my family that doesn't play an instrument. My husband's a musician, all my brothers, my parents are gone, but it's a whole story. But came out, visited, saw the madness, decided I would go to college and become a social worker.
You're kind of doing that as a studio manager, right?
Yeah.
That's social work, the ultimate social work.
Well, I was a psych major with a business minor. And so I came back out to California. My mom was out here. My whole family relocated out to California while I was going to school in South Carolina. And I came out in like 85. And my brother, Steve, had left the record plant and had taken over a room at what was the old Kendon Recorders in Burbank. It's called Glenwood Place now. So that studio, which he took over at the time, was called Take One. So that's the first place I went to work, and I was learning how to be an assistant. He was a stern teacher, but a good one. And after probably about a year of learning to assist, I told him I was working with a famous engineer, a guy named Shel Talmy. He's an engineer. He did The Who, Kinks, a lot of records, and he's blind.
Oh, wow.
And he's alive still. And I worked a lot with Bob Rock. So Bob Rock and I talk about that a lot. Bob had a band in Canada when he was a young guy, and he was a singer, and Shel was our engineer. But anyway, I was doing a session with him and running a tape machine and realizing that, this guy's blind and he's amazing. And I thought, well, I'm never going to be this good. And then I had another friend named Chubba Paytos, who's no longer with us, who was also amazing. And I was like, I went to my brother and I said, if I can't be like amazing, then I don't want to be an engineer. And my friends laughed. They're like, oh, you should have just stuck with it, because I was actually pretty good. But I was a good assistant. But I said, I would like to help you sell the studio and I'd like to help you book it. And I had worked in a lot of hotels. I'd been a bartender, put myself through college as a bartender. And I'd worked for a lot of different hotels, like Hilton, Hyatt, all these big main chains. And I started booking it. And the first thing I ever booked was the real first big project I ever booked was Appetite for Destruction with Guns N' Roses.
Oh my gosh, that's a big one.
Yeah, that was a starter.
You know what's funny about that? It's like, when I moved to New York City, I went in and I said, hey, I'd like to work at the studio. I was a freelance guy, but didn't have enough work in the new city to be able to support myself. So I was trying to get a date in a room, like get into a room. And the guy was like, I don't need, his name's Clay Sheff. He owned a studio called Smash Studios in New York City and Gallery Studios in SSL room. And he said to me, I don't need anybody. And I said, just give me one session. Because I knew if I got one session, I could get into that room and burrow myself into that room. And I did that. And I remember as a kid working in Pittsburgh saying, hey, every hour I work, the studio owner makes $100. So like I'm a net plus. It's like, that's what you are. It's like, if you say, hey, I want to book your room, you'd have to be insane to not let somebody book your room, even if they're freelance working. If they bring in 1,000 and you have to give them 250, right? I mean, this is a net gain of 700.
I do it every day.
That's the beautiful thing. There's so many people that are cost centers in their business, right? It's like they get paid and it comes off the top. We sort of bring the top, and then that's a beautiful part of that kind of business. And it all has to do with your confidence to be able to say, hey, I can get the work and then I can manage the work. Because when you're talking about managing a studio, like you manage a studio, 5 rooms, you're talking about cartage coming in, you're talking about lunch, you're talking about interviews and dealing with the marketing of the studio. It's like, it's a million moving pieces, but to have the confidence to do all that at the end of the day, it takes a special kind of person that, like, maybe you would have been a great engineer, but this is what you were meant to be, I think.
Well, I certainly love what I do. And I have to give a shout out to my staff because, it's all about the chain of people. You know what I mean? I mean, the runners are really the front line of defense, and they spend a lot more time with the clients than I do, especially during this past 18 months and what a trying and bizarre time that has been. But we've been open since last May. I mean, we've been following all the guidelines.
Oh, wow. That's early on.
Yeah, I was super hyper focused on, following the county guidelines and trying to make people feel safe. Because at the end of the day, what a facility like mine is a hotel with technology.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's what it really is. It's about privacy and service, because people can record, as you know.
Right.
We've heard a lot of music these past 18 months, some of it not great, some of it good. And, if you're good, I always say to people, if you're good, you can record in your bathroom. Well, if you're good, right. If you can write a good song, it doesn't matter, but what we do, and ideally what a place like East West will do, is enhance through the equipment, through the experience, through the acoustic spaces. It's going to make the music sound better.
When you say it's a hotel, it really, when I talk to other engineers that are like, oh, I just got back from Toronto and I worked at this place, or I worked in Europe at this place, or West Coast. Yeah. They don't tell me about the 80 series Neve. They tell me about the hot tub or the pinball machine or like all the stuff that doesn't get onto the record, so. Right.
Well, I think there's a few people that were instrumental in sort of realizing how important service was. I mean, certainly Bill Putnam back in the day, but, and no buts. I mean, Bill's a genius, but he was also, he was a designer. He was a gear maker. So all like 1176s and LA2s, they were all made in my building when it was Western. And it's on the craft of engineering, thank God. He, Tom Dowd, people like that. Then the managers came along, and there were people during that time whose names I don't know. So forgive me if you're watching this and you worked at Western back in the 60s. But Rose Mann really kind of set the tone. She ran the record plant on 3rd Street after Dee Willoughby, and she really set the bar high for how service would be and how the infrastructure would be with runners. And I think we have the Beatles to thank for the 12-hour day. That's the story I heard. I asked Paul McCartney about that once. He was in denial. But I think she set the tone about how things should be. And then Paula Salvatore, who ran Capitol, who is now head of client services for all of Universal Studios. That's her new role. And then I've just sort of been trugging along, and by the sheer length of time that I've done the job, have become like one of the pioneers because I just didn't quit.
That's a good symptom in our business if you don't quit. You know, there's been multiple times that Mike and I have probably considered quitting, but you know, if you look back, you say, "Oh man, I would have missed out on all the other peaks and valleys that were on the other side of that." Yeah. When you have all these runners, so tell us, like, if somebody comes and says, "Hey, I want to start working at East West," what does that look like for them? How long do they start off as a runner?
Yeah.
Then go to a general, then assistant, and then tell us what the lifespan of a successful.
The trajectory hasn't changed. Like, people ask me all the time about how has it changed since you've been in the business? Well, basically, Pro Tools replaced the tape machine. You know, that's one thing. But the trajectory is the same, except now there are a lot more recording schools. I work with the Conservatory of Recording Arts and Sciences in Tempe, Arizona. I'm the head of their advisory board. God bless. Shout out to them. They have a great curriculum, and they actually go to industry people. You guys should meet these guys. And they ask you, like, what should we be teaching these people? You know, and I said, well, you shouldn't just teach them to work in a recording studio. They should record football games. They should do everyththing, you know, any place there's audio, that's where they should be. Right. So they're very cool. And then I work with Blackbird, which is John McBride's school that's affiliated with Blackbird Studios, where you guys are. Great school, great curriculum, great teachers. Amazing. Kevin Beckham, Mark Rubel.
Except for Steve Marcantonio.
I don't know that. I don't know who that is.
Oh,
you got to know. You don't know Steve Marcantonio?
No.
He's the best.
I mean, maybe.
I don't know that he teaches there, but he's down there quite a bit. Does he teach there, Mike?
I'll probably meet him Thursday.
He's one of the nicest people you'll ever meet.
He's one of the greatest humans in Nashville.
Look forward to meeting you, Steve, if you're watching this.
Yeah, and you will love him.
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead.
So I get him out of the schools, and they do an internship to fulfill academic requirement, because that's the only way you can legally do an internship. That takes about a month and a half. It's our dating period. If they do okay, I don't take on an intern that I don't have a job for at the end of the tunnel, you know, end of the internship.
That's very cool. That's awesome.
So I don't try not to use, you know, slave labor, and bring them on internship, complete the internship, hire them as a runner. They run anywhere from a year to a year and a half.
Well, tell us what a runner does. Like lunches?
They get food. They help clean the building. They help do everything. I mean, they're the eyes and ears. I'll be like, what about that
front
light bulb?
desk, answer phones. You know? Right?
Yeah, and they help in the studios too. I mean, they help with all the setups and teardowns. They pretty early on, they get to handle microphones. They get to go into the rooms. And I always tell them, I'm like, look, there is no seniority here. This is a fuzzy Shark Tank. You guys, if you want to excel, you got to go in the rooms when they're open, which lately, thankfully, it hasn't been very much. But they do all kinds of things, and they start thirding. And when they're thirding, that's when we do like really large string dates. Pre-COVID, this would be 60, 65 pieces. But now it's 20 and still challenging. And the timing of a string date, we're doing rock dates. So
I've never heard of the term thirding. I get it.
Oh, yeah. It's been around.
Second engineer, I've never heard of a third engineer.
Oh, really?
Thirding.
Oh, no, it's been around for a while. It just means he helps the assistant.
So these guys get paid, yes?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so they get paid. They're sitting at the front desk.
Not if you're an intern.
Not if you're an intern. That's for school credit. In fact, you pay to be an intern because you're paying for school credit. So you get there as a runner, you get lunches, you help the assistant or the second engineer set up for sessions, but usually you're not in sessions as a third, we'll call them thirder.
Yeah, no, not usually. That's usually part of the trajectory. I mean, I have to know, because some of these people in the schools are fantastic, but I always say, like, it's kind of like being a doctor or being a resident of the hospital. It's a whole lot different walking around and doing rounds and then being in the operating room with a heart in your hand.
Yeah. So you never know if they're going to go rogue
in
the middle of a session with somebody that it could ruin their impression of the studio.
Yeah, they're too green. I mean, in the interview, I caution them on many things, or basically terrify them, with my assistant and my chief engineer, Lawrence Malchez, who's a genius, and my assistant, Keith Munson, who's also a genius. They're both engineers and both musicians. And we explained to them the etiquette. One of the most important things, as you guys know, is vibe. You got to be able to be a good hang. You know what I mean? And I get down and dirty with basics like, okay, you got to be clean. You can't have BO sitting in a room for 14 hours in a control room, you know, and there's women too, you know, God bless. There's plenty of women. Yeah. I never had any issues. I'm not particularly feminist, but I do want to say that I never had an issue from being female. As an assistant, as a runner, I never had, but I'm also pretty tough. And
I think that's a pretty good observation. I haven't ever seen any sexism in the studio. If someone's great in the studio, they're great in the studio.
Yeah. Engineers are good guys. They don't care. If you know what the hell you're doing, then they're happy to have you. And the fact that you're pretty and smell good when they turn around is just a bonus.
Yeah. You know? All right. So these runners spend about a year to a year and a half doing that at some regular, you know, nominal pay, probably minimum wage-ish, right?
Minimum wage. No, it's minimum wage.
And you say like, hey, it doesn't matter if you've been here 10 years. You can set your own trajectory by just being great. So you could be a runner for 6 months before you get to the next level. You could be there for a year and a half.
You could be running for 3 months. I mean, I got a guy right now that came in and he's just kicking ass on all the other people behind him. He's quiet. He's friendly. He's smart as a whip. And I'm like, oh, y'all better watch out. Because he is climbing over your backs.
And
because
go ahead. Are these runners? Is there a camaraderie there, or are they in heavy competition? Do they like?
No, there's a heavy camaraderie. Yeah, no.
That's the way I'd want it to be. If you imagine.
Well, and one of the things I teach him is because I don't have time to micromanage everybody, and there's a million policies and procedures in place. I mean, the runner manual is probably that big. I probably don't even know everything that's in the damn thing, but they hold each other accountable. And that's one of the things I tell them. I'm like, look, I don't need to know if the guy last night didn't clean the toilet. All I need to know is that at 8 a.m. the next day that the toilet's clean. So if you come in at 8 a.m. and the dude who closed didn't do it, feel free to text the guy and go, hey, MF, what happened? Why didn't you clean the toilet? You know what I mean? Because I think, you know, and I encourage a mild amount of hazing. But nothing bad. No bullying or anything like that. But just like hey, dude, why'd you leave me holding the bag?
Yeah, right. Joe has this saying I love. He said, "If I can't trust you to get my lunch right, how do I trust you in the studio?"
Exactly the same sentence. Yeah, I say that exact same sentence because the details. The other day it was really busy, and I went and I got a food order close by to help out. It was hectic, and I had the order in my hand. It was 5 sandwiches. I knew which ones they were, and the bag was sealed in the restaurant. And so I opened the bag, and I said, "There's only 4 sandwiches here." I said, "There's supposed to be 3 number 4s, a number 3, and a number 13." And she goes, "No." And I go, "There's only 4 sandwiches here." So I stood there while she got the other sandwich. Then I got the receipt. Then I went back to the studio, put it where the clients needed it in their lounge, laid the receipt with it. And, you know, that was that, you know what I mean? But the runners were like, oh my God, she went and got food, you know?
Yeah. Well, and more importantly, you went and did it right.
Exactly.
It's important to like, maybe I won't be an asshole on my own behalf, but I will be an asshole on someone else's behalf.
Absolutely.
Because I'm committed to making their experience great. It's the same thing we talk about in session. It's our responsibility. I'm a kind person, but I will dress someone down. I'll take them to the side and I will literally eviscerate the idea of what they did wrong because they can't do it in the best interest of my client. They can't do that.
It sounds corny, but they're dishonoring the craft. I mean, and that's how I look at it. I'm a huge champion of engineers. I think they're the unsung heroes of all recorded the music that we've heard in the past, 80 years or whatever. But and when people come into the interview, a lot of kids will come in and they'll go, I want to be a producer. I'm like, okay, well, then you don't get this job. Right. Because if you don't want to be a recording engineer, then you don't get to work here. Because I don't train songwriters here. I don't train musicians here. And if that's what you want to do, power to you.
Go do it. You're wasting your time here.
Yeah. But you're not going to waste my time. And I'm not going to invest in you and let you work in these hallowed halls if you don't understand why you're here. Yeah.
How many of your runners wash out? Don't make it to the next, let's say the next step would be an assistant, I guess.
I would say 1 or 2 a year.
So
not many. So there's a staff of about 22 people.
Yeah.
And there's 7 to 8 runners. And I would say, I mean, they usually wash out as an intern. Like I've had people leave within 3 hours. No, seriously. And that was like about a year ago. That was pre-COVID. Some kid came in, he said, I'll sweep, I'll do anything. I'm like,
Right.
Okay. Well, within 3 hours, he goes, yeah, I can't do this. All
right. So how many thirds, or what are we calling the runners? How many runners a year do you put through? Was that a runner that just went through there?
Yeah, that's my husband. That's Brian. He's a guitar player.
How many runners would you say you get a year?
Well, I mean, like I said, there's really only room for 8. So if the assistants don't leave, which happens, I have to push people out of the nest. And
so it's tough to even get in there as a runner.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Here's another thing I've found out. So I used to do internships. I have a recording school at my place. Before the recording school, I used to do internships. So Belmont and MTSU, and sometimes out of town schools like University of Miami or Berkeley and Boston would end up coming, and I'd have 2 interns a semester. And they were very sought after positions because, if they go back and you get a reputation, people wanted to be in that space. Yeah. And then inevitably you get that phone call from your sister who says, hey, we got my son's friend is really into this and he wants to go to school for it. Can he can he become an intern for you? And they don't realize it, but it's a coveted spot, right? People what I didn't realize was,
I think there's a word for that. It's called no.
Well, let me tell you my mistake. So like, I didn't realize that by the time people got to audition for that spot, they were all focused, laser focused, and they were all dedicated to the task. When I had this young man call me, and he didn't earn it. I was going to give it to him, but he didn't earn it. And then it was like questions like, can I live with you whenever I do my internship, and how much does it pay? And I'm like, it's an internship, and it was just, he made me pay for it. But it made me appreciate those guys that go through that fight process to get those internships, because they're already really good. And I didn't realize that, because they were so focused on the competitiveness to get that slot.
You know what I would say? I try to always, I can't do it every time, but I try to always talk to someone, even if they come through a backdoor weak channel. We'll call that the weak channel, like that, because you never know. There could be this really amazing kid that just stumbled upon some connection, and you don't want to be an a-hole and overlook stuff like Jewel.
I think what I'm saying is the process works. Because you probably, by the time they get to you and by the time they were getting to me, they had already battled it out in this like King of the Mountain scenario where we were getting the good ones, right?
Well, dude, aren't you making the people at the schools vet them for you? Because what I do is I call the schools and I go, I don't want to talk to the average person. I want your best and your brightest. So don't send me any crap.
Well, I guess the point is we're really lucky. And by the time they get to be the bottom rung at your place, they've already really proven themselves quite a bit, right? So you say, okay, year to year and a half, minimum wage, and there's not a lot of fallout. It's only about 8 positions, and only maybe 1 or 2 of them may even open up in a given period of time. So it's a slow trickle in. They stay there for about that amount of time, and then they become a general, or do they become an assistant?
They become an assistant.
Okay, and tell us what an assistant does at East
West. And we all know what an assistant does, but the people that are watching, an assistant engineer is so important, because think about a commercial studio like mine. People are coming in to work in the rooms. They may never have worked there. They may never have worked on that console. So an assistant engineer, in my mind, has to know almost more, other than the years of experience, than the engineer that's coming in to do the session. He has to know the room inside and out. He has to keep the momentum of the session going no matter what. He has to troubleshoot gear and keep rolling. It's because, these consoles are 50, 60 years old. So he has to troubleshoot on the fly. And like we said, mainly his main job is to keep the momentum of the session going, to protect the engineer against making any stupid mistakes without making him look stupid. Right. And to do all this thanklessly and tirelessly and quietly while not getting any acknowledgement, any praise, or any notice.
That's awesome.
I think,
bye, baby. Okay.
I think that when I go into a room that I haven't worked in before, and when the assistant shows up, I feel like it's my responsibility at that point to make things sound great. And he has to know which tie lines are bad. I don't mind if a tie line's bad. Don't use it, right? As long as we have enough tie lines. So it's his job to literally be like, hey, I own this studio.
He shows you where the mines are in the mine
shows you where the mines are, where the bodies are buried.
Yeah.
And he enables you. It's like, if I don't know the automation, like I don't know the J series automation well, because every time I worked on a J console, the assistant was doing that. I knew the EG automation, right? I mean, that was where I lived. But it's like, you go into a room like that, or if it has GML, it's like, he's the guy that's just like, okay, giving you the quick tutorial on what the buttons on the fader do.
Flying faders want to now flying faders too.
He's that guy, right? So he's responsible to make it all work. And I'm responsible to make it all sound good.
That's right. You're basically, in my mind, you're basically producing on the fly, even if there's a producer in the room with you, because we all know there's a lot of producers that are not engineers. God bless them. They have different strengths and talents. If you're lucky, you're working with a producer who is an engineer, who understands your pain, feels your pain as an engineer, and knows what you're dealing with. Won't back you
into a corner, right? Yeah.
And then shit rolls downhill to the assistant, and then from the assistant to the runner.
Well, if you go into that situation and the assistant doesn't know the room, I'll never go back there.
That's a nightmare.
Never go back there. So you built a room. East West arguably is worth $5 to $15 million, let's say, right? I don't know. I'm not considering real estate. It's worth a ton of money. You've got that amount of money invested. I will never go back to your studio if I have that experience as a producer engineer, because not because I'm a diva, but because the same reason I dress down an intern is to make my client whole. My client can't ever have any issues. And if I don't have issues,
I'm going to remember this about you.
Well, I think that's all engineers. I think we're kind and we'll be real nice to the people because people were nice. But if I got an incompetent person, I would either say to you, I'd say, hey, I can't have that guy. I don't know I would be honest. I don't know your room well enough. That's happened to me
for sure many times.
I need someone that's a real engineer in there with me because I don't know your room well enough. I would either go to you, and if I didn't, I would just go start working on it.
But what about the situation where you're a studio owner, which you are, and you're like, oh crap, I don't have anybody to do the session. The only guy I have is this really green guy. And I hope to God that this doesn't fucking blow back on me.
I wouldn't do it. I would do it. I will go and assist.
Oh yeah. That's not always an option. So I've thrown green people in. Now, it's not that I'm so wise and all knowing or anything, but like we were saying, you probably didn't get in as a runner if you didn't have some jewel or something that we recognize the potential for greatness. So let's say you're super fucking green and you've never done a session and you're a runner. Your dream is that I throw you in on a vocal date on the Trident A range, which nobody knows how to use, in Studio 3, and you don't blow it. Or maybe you're terrified. The engineer can tell you're terrified, but you keep your mouth shut. You get through it. He may even be aware that you were not completely at home in this environment. But let's say it's not a big deal. Let's say it's a one-day vocal.
Yeah.
Then the guy comes to me and says, okay, the kid was green, but he was so enthusiastic that I didn't even mind it. Yeah. That can be a dream situation too. Now, obviously, again, nothing can inhibit the momentum of the session or make him have a bad experience. But I am fortunate enough that if I'm going to do something like that, I'm honest. I'll go to the engineer and I'll go, okay, this guy's kind of green. I am in a total jam. If it starts to go south, let me know. You know what I mean? And then my chief engineer will come in, or my assistant who's an engineer, he'll come in. But more often than not, I have to say that when you throw the challenge at somebody,
that's an important.
Think about you.
Yeah, that's an important part.
You rose to the occasion. You were probably scared shitless the first time you did a session. You were like, oh my God, I hope I don't fuck this up. Pardon my French. I hope you can bleep me out later.
Oh no.
But so that terror, is a really good incentive and a good impetus for getting it together.
Are you hand choosing the engineers will be cool with this?
Oh yeah.
You got it. So these people you're tight.
If it's someone that's never worked there, because think about this, like
that's a good point.
That a lot of people come in from the outside and they've never worked on an A range, or they've never worked in these rooms. I mean, you and I know, having had engineering backgrounds, console's a console. You know what I mean? If it's in line, if it's not in line, whatever's happening, but you might not know, oh, this is how this route's here. This is how the summing bus works on this console. It's different than the Neve. It's different than the SSL, or it's different than an API. You know what I mean? So you're like in there and you're going, because Studio 3 is where it's the smallest of the tracking rooms, and it's where we start a lot of people out, but it's actually not the least complicated, because that A range is a different, it's so cool, but it's a different animal. You know what I mean?
I've only read about A ranges. I'm not sure I've ever even actually seen one in person.
You know who has one is the Tina Turner episode we did, Proud Mary. Brent Mayer. That's an A range, isn't it? Mikey?
I don't know.
Oh no, it wasn't an A range. It was
an ADB.
No, it was the predecessor to the A range.
Okay.
I forgot. He mentioned it was a model I'd never even heard of, but he said it was the predecessor.
All right, so let's get.
Yeah, you're right. That should never happen.
Well, and it's different. If I'm in a room and I at least know the room enough, at the end of the day, it just can't ever get to the point where there's a compromise in the session. And Absolutely. You've got a system down. Let's face it, most of the rooms are working, and even rooms that have SSLs and Neves that are single room facilities, these guys are flying by the seat of their pants. You've got a system where you go through and there's mile markers, and by the time there's a level of competency, even if those guys don't realize it, they still are at a level that a lot of these guys aren't. So a general assistant lasts for how long? You
can be an assistant anywhere from, 2 years to basically around 5 years. What I start doing is having you, probably even before that, I would start having you first, because a lot of clients, as you know, a lot of hip hop clients and a lot of newer A&R people, every single day, every day, I have to explain to people why they need a first engineer and why it's a 2-person job every single day. So a lot of times what will happen is they won't have a budget, or won't have an engineer. I have sort of a very small stable of freelance guys that I would call, that you and I would consider like mid-level, good, but not famous yet. You know what I mean? So they're affordable for a client. But I'll take my staff, an experienced assistant, and he'll be the first. You know what I mean? And I'll get him a firsting gig. So that'll happen within like year 3.
So what are you calling a first? Okay, so we're saying we've had the runner classification. We've had what we're calling a general assistant or second engineer position, right? Firsting to me would be being the engineer on the session. What is
firsting is being the engineer on the session, but what I'm saying, you and I both know it's a 2-person job. It's an assistant and a first, always, in my opinion, no exceptions, unless you're alone in your house and it's just you and you're with one person. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that said, what I'm saying is I'll bring in a senior staff guy, get him firsting pay, have him first and run the session, and I'll put an assistant with him.
Got it. So, and that is like, there'll be moments of opportunity, meaning, hey, someone needs to come in tonight and do a vocal.
Exactly.
You're going to be the first engineer on it. That's how that's not like now they're first engineer. It's like from 8 o'clock.
Got to first at one time, and they might be assisting again for 6 months.
From 8 o'clock at night till 4 a.m, you're going to be a first engineer, and then you're back to the world of assisting for the next year. And every once in a while, you'll pop up and down into that role.
And there's that awkward station too, where you're running, going into assisting, and you're going back and forth between running and assisting. And that's the hardest. Right. That's the one where people lose heart. Yep. And the wheat from the chaff gets separated, because if they can,
it's demoralizing.
If they can hang during, and I tell them that, and if they can hang during that, I'm like, look, if it gets slow, for example, with COVID, you had a lot of people whose careers got like, so I'm like, look, if you can make it through this, you're still going to be running sometimes, and you better do a good job when you're running. Because if you're assisting and you're running and you start screwing up as a runner, I'm still going to fire you.
It doesn't ever stop. Note to everyone listening, that will continue. You will end up going on to engineer records that are number one records. Yep. And then you'll go on to write songs that are number one songs. And then the next year you'll be a nobody. So you're continually getting shoved down into that. It doesn't stop. So
if you're weak spirited, or if you don't really have the tenacity, you should probably do something else.
Well, you have to be able to you have to grow like the calluses that you get as a guitar player.
You just
right?
gotta love it.
You have to be, you've got to be able to know that this too shall pass. And eventually you're on a cycle. You're going to have, for every valley you have, you're going to have a peak. And you just have to keep the heart and know that you need to find a way not to become an egomaniac, because you cannot sustain being an egomaniac or bitter. You can't do that. You've got to find a way to cope. Otherwise you'll break. It's like,
well, because you could be doing that one-off goofy vanity project where some crazy person calls you and they have money and they want to live their dream. And you could find out, oh, this is actually really good music.
Yeah.
Like, this is cool.
So question for you. We already acknowledged that, okay, a runner probably makes minimum wage. An assistant give me a range that somebody would make as an assistant.
$18 to $20 an hour.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
$18 to $20 an hour. And there's probably a ton of work. Well, yeah, that's true. Like a teardown is $1 million there. Okay, so once you start engineering, what do you think when you start firsting? What do those, hey, he's not a famous guy, but he's a solid guy. What's a guy like that make?
Minimum $50 an hour.
$50 an hour. And let's say
65, very regularly.
50, 65 an hour. So we're looking at $650 days if you're doing 10-hour day blocks usually for your rate, and gratis to 12. And I guess, the sky's the limit. If you're, back in the old days, you'd hear these stories about CLA and TLA making 10 grand a mix. So, and doing 2 mixes in a day, So, I'm sure that you bring in a George Massenburg, the rate's it's anything that you're willing to pay.
Well, I think the point still exists for mixers to give you perspective. And this is a perfect example. And this has happened to me. It's like Groundhog Day. It's probably happened to you too. Many times where someone that I've brought on as a runner, like there's a young man named Jeff Ellis, and he was the first intern at East West. This is before I came in 2010. He was there in 2009. Started as an intern, came from Crass. Then he became a runner. Then he was assisting. I got a cold call for a session. It was for a vocal in Studio 3, and it was for Frank Ocean. Well, I didn't know who Frank Ocean was in 2016 or 2015. I had no clue. I said, oh, you're going to do this vocal. He did the vocal. He became Frank's guy. He won a Grammy. This all happened within, for him, I think it was probably like a 4 or 5 year period from internship to Grammy, which you and I all, that's pretty
very fast.
That's fast.
And now he has moved back in to what we call Studio 4, and he's a tenant. He's my only tenant, and he's a famous mixer.
I've seen a bunch of videos. I've seen a bunch of videos with Jeff. Yeah, he seems like the nicest guy ever, too.
He's a nice guy, and he totally got it from day one.
Right.
He understood the importance of being he's one of the few people that I saw readily early on grasp that he was his own manager. He has a manager now, but getting paid, marketing yourself, all this kind of stuff. And he just did a single with Dominic Fike and Paul McCartney.
That's amazing.
And I couldn't be more proud. You know what I mean? And he's amazing.
When you see these guys, this is great for us because the hit factories of the world and the power stations, they're kind of gone, right? You guys are one of the few left, and it's really great to see. This is the way things used to happen. It still happens. It's good to see that in the modern world, people can go from picking up lunches to mixing Paul McCartney.
Absolutely.
Right? So when you see these people, are you ever wrong? Do you know when you meet them as the runners, hey, this guy is going to make it, this guy is not going to make it?
I wouldn't say a lot. I mean, I've been wrong many times for sure. My assistant and I laugh because we'll say, well, they gave good interview. Right, you know what I mean? Right. Like they come in and they say all the right things. And then the next thing you know, the person's a fuck up, a classic example. I mean, so many funny stories that you have, I have, most of which I can't tell because I'm still working and I have to, protect the not so innocent. But classic example was, and I'm human. Like I'll like develop a soft spot for somebody. And I'll give some people more rope than others. But at the end of the day, it's me giving them rope and they either hang themselves, or they crawl up to the top of the mountain. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but I had this one kid. I love this kid, right? This kid was great. And I expected great things from this kid. And I come in one day and I find a CD case with his ATM card in like the client lounge with Blow on a CD with his ATM card there, laying there. And I'm like, wow, really? So I call him up and I'm like, and I say, hey, yeah, I need to talk to you. He goes, oh, I'm off today. I'm out at the beach. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're fired. And he's like, I thought you were cool. I'm like, I am, but you're an idiot. So,
Yeah.
So let's say if you
your
spend,
name is on this thing.
is there a point in their runner career where they get past, okay, maybe they gave you a good interview, but is there a point at which you know, like, this guy's going to make it? Like, when does that happen for you? Like, when do you sense somebody is like, this guy is going to, sky's the limit for this person?
When it happens, when they find something and they fix it. Like, in other words, if because there's all kinds of ancillary stuff at East West. I mean, there's crazy stereo systems in the lounges and stuff like that. And I'll be like, okay, where there's an outdoor deck in Studio 5 Lounge. And I'll be like, I'll go up there every now and then to kind of check it out because I don't go up there that often. You know what I mean? I got a bad knee, whatever. But I walk out there and I'm like, why is there no music outside? Why can't I hear anything? And I understand the routing of an amp or, preamp to a set of speakers, but I'll call someone up and I'll be like, okay, what's happening over here? And if they can trace it or, for example, say, oh, it's the fuses. And they just go get it and they fix it and they make it work. Then I go, all right,
and
they understand.
Here's what people don't understand about that is, like, everybody's waiting for the big break. Sometimes your big break is caring enough about something that's not critical to a hit record, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's like saying, I care enough to figure out what's going on and where the problem is on this music outside on the patio situation.
No,
like, what is that?
A big thing.
Kids don't realize that, though. If you're listening to this, that's when someone sees you do something like that, and they're you. If you're Candace and you see somebody do that, you've instantly got, like,
without being asked,
your stock is way higher, because now it goes back to that. Hey, if I can trust you with my lunch order, I could trust you with my Michael Jackson vocal.
Well, and
right?
I now know that they actually, we say grok it, I now know that they actually understand at least basic signal flow and what's going on.
But even more than that, there's that aspect, right? They're capable and they're pragmatic. They can fix. It's the fact that they cared about getting something that was not of consequence right. Because now,
because
you can trust them with things of consequence, right?
It's all of consequence. You're talking about the client's experience. We always tell them, like, look, by the time people order their lunch, they're starving.
Right.
And then you bring back the lunch and the person's a vegan and the last thing left is a steak salad because you screwed up the order. Now the person's in a bad mood. They don't feel good. You know what I mean? They feel uncared for and not considered, which is not okay.
Right. It's the only break they have in their day too.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting to me in hearing Candace talk is, like, we all can make music. I'm sitting in my studio right now as I talk to you. I make records here all the time.
Yeah.
But that experience is what you're selling.
Yeah.
That's exciting. I'm thinking of myself waking up. Like, I don't get to work in these large format rooms very often.
Over.
No, but I mean, it's like, I would be excited to wake up and go to this room. I almost feel a little pressure for you that, like, those rooms don't exist much. Like, this is like a big deal to go to one of these rooms.
That's the thing. Like, I mean, that's so kind of you to say that, but I feel that, I wear that mantle, and I feel that because when they come in, 99% of the time, people are really excited to be there.
Yeah.
And then they walk in and it's a bonus that it kind of looks kind of cool. I never really gave a crap about the design, to be honest. I just wanted a good roof and working bathrooms. And to me, always the rooms were important, even when I didn't work there. And my boss, God bless him, Doug Rogers, he called me in when they were doing the redesign. And he's like, oh, we're thinking about doing this. I'm like, you can't do that. You can't change that. You got to poke the holes in the pegboard if you paint Studio One wall. You cannot, from a superstitious standpoint, but why mess up
right
a known
one of the most
space?
legendary spaces ever known?
No, and it's heavy because you see a lot of times you'll see people go into a room and they'll change a room. And all of you designers out there, God bless you. Though you're probably not engineering every day. And I say this to all of the designers that might see this, and you know who you are. take into consideration the people that are using the rooms that you're designing. Don't get up in your own head about your theory and what you think is happening on your scope.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
I want that room to look just like it looked back then. As an engineer, when I go in there, I want it because those recordings were done in that space, and there's like a superstition. There's this old sort of vintage goo on it that I just want from a mental standpoint, not from not that it makes a difference.
I've got hip hop guys, and this is such a cool thing to witness, you guys. I've got hip hop guys that'll go into Studio 3, and we call it the Pet Sounds room because a lot of Pet Sounds was done in that room, and there's no isolation in that room. And people will be like, well, and when I first came and saw an ATR 124, I'm like, oh my God, it looks like a refrigerator. Like I had only worked on Otaris. I was like, that's insane. That's huge. I don't know what that is. And then I saw a room that had no isolation, having worked in more modern spaces. And I'm like, well, how's this work? Right. And you quickly get the building of a doghouse, the use of baffles, or recording live together, embracing bleed, not being, Al Schmidt, God rest his soul. And I was talking to Tommy Vicari the other day. Over miking is a horrendous faux pas, in my opinion. If you're in a room that has an acoustic, a good sound, and I'm not saying you don't have tigers to tame in a big ambient space, but if you're in a room and you're hyper close miking everything, you're missing the point of being in a live room and letting the room do the job for you.
Right.
Yeah.
A couple overheads. You know what I mean? You look at those old sessions. You look at a lot of that
great
stuff.
point.
I'm not saying there isn't modern technique to be embraced, but I am saying if you're miking every violin, you know what I mean? You're a dumbass, in my opinion.
Right.
Well, that's incredible. Can you walk us through, one thing I don't think I mentioned in the intro is that there's been more Grammys. Your studio, that space has generated more Grammys than any other recording studio. You had said Pet Sounds, all the Sinatra stuff, or a lot of the incredible Sinatra stuff was done there. I know you guys still have his old bandstand there, right? Where you would
the old podium. We use it every day.
The old podium. Tell us some of the big historic records that have been done in that space that come to mind. I mean,
you could see them on the website, and I've been trying to come up with a way to put a plaque outside each room, but then we laughed that we'd have to keep re-engraving it every 6 months. Nice. Again, it's not the room or the space that makes the great records. It's the musicians and it's the staff. We agree on that 100%. But like we were saying, it doesn't hurt to do drums in Studio 2 because the room makes it really easy for you. Right. So there's a reason that the Chili Peppers would come back, or that, Tom Petty, people like that. I mean, engineers are smart, they come into a room and they get a good sound. And then the producer of the band says, where do you want to work? And they're going to go where they know their shit sound good over the years. And they're going to look, it's going to make them look good.
Right.
So, but a lot of, each room, Studio 1 is the largest. I always say it's like Papa Bear, Studio 2 is Mama Bear, and Studio 3 is Baby Bear. And then Studio 4 is the tenant space. Studio 5 is the SSL room, which was built as a mix room. It basically ends up being just a two-fader vocal room most of the time. But Studio 1 is really big. So, again, we were talking about taming a space. In a space like that, you need, we unceremoniously call them meat sacks, but you need bodies. You need people. You need
right.
You need people to take up
absorbers,
air.
Yeah,
to take up the air in a space like that. Studio 2 is more of a Studio 1 is known for a lot of Sinatra, a lot of film scores, The Godfather, so many records. I mean, Barbra Streisand and Chris Christopherson.
Oh wow!
A Star Is Born. I mean, wow. that one that was done.
And that's got an 80 series in there, right? It's an 80-78 or
an 80-78. It's two 80-78s locked together. I'll tell you. Mm-hmm. I'll try to tell you a quick fun story. So, Stephen Sills came in a few years ago, and he has this band called The Rides, and he was working in. He's worked in Studio 1 and Studio 2, and Kenny Wayne Shepherd was on these sessions with him. I think Stephen is a national treasure. I mean, he's a curmudgeon, but I adore him. I was in Studio One day, and I've had many experiences like this. I was in Studio One day before the session started, and I was standing there just kind of making sure everything was cool. And he walked in behind me, and I didn't know he was standing there, and he started to cry. Mm-hmm. And I turned around and I said, "Oh God, I'm sorry. I was just making sure everything." He's, "No, no, no." And I said, "Why are you crying?" And "Why are you crying?" He said, "When I was 19 years old and I came out here from Florida, the first session I ever did was in this room, sitting right here behind Glenn Campbell." Wow. And he goes, "And I was a session player and I was terrified." And he said, Glenn Campbell turned around and said, "Just keep time. You'll be all right." You know what I mean? And that's so Stephen cool. Stills. Wow. You know what I mean? And Leon Russell was Doris Day's piano player. You know what I mean? This is right. Crazy, crazy history. So I consider myself a curator of a working museum.
It's an art. It is a museum. And it's like, when you get to make a record in there, you've got to feel the levity of like, okay, we're really doing something special here.
But we make so many. We work with so many people that you've never heard of yet. And I tell my staff all the time, I'm like, the Beatles made a first record. U2 made a first record. Every time that phone rings, you don't know if it's the next Michael Jackson on the phone. Yeah. You don't know who. Like when I got that call for Frank Ocean, I didn't know who Frank Ocean was. You know? What
console's in Studio 2?
It's an Eve. It's an older Eve. It was an 8028 that was modded to 40 channels.
Okay.
Supposedly the sister console to Dave Grohl's console.
Yeah, so like an 8038, 8028, did you say? Something like that?
Yeah, it's an 8028 that was modded.
With 1070,
it just has 40 channels, which it didn't originally
What is the
have.
mic pre? The famous 1272? 1072s? 1072s.
1073s.
1073s. How could I forget that?
And then 33609s are the 33609s?
Yeah.
31105s. 31105s?
31102s.
31102s, 31105s.
Yeah, those are the other ones that are.
33609 is the broadcast.
33609 is a compressor. They had.
There you go.
It was the old what used to be the 32264As that lived in the console became that.
This is too much in the hard drive.
I know, but then it's like whenever you do call it, sometimes you'll call something back that you've been using your whole life. You're like, where is that? It's in a different filing cabinet in the other side of my brain. And Studio 3 has the Trident A range.
Has an A range, and then Studio 4 has a G plus. And I always say the consoles have their own story, right?
Oh yeah.
Like so the A range that's in 3. Most of the A ranges that came to the United States were built by the engineers at Trident for the Robs brothers at Cherokee. So Cherokee Studios on Fairfax, which is no longer there. So, and they're incredible musicians, studio owners, et cetera, personalities. That console, and like the LA2As or the LA3As always laugh and say, well, they went around the world and they came back home.
Yeah.
So the A range, we got this A range from Longview Farms in Massachusetts, and Gary Meyerberg, who was the chief engineer at East West when I returned, he restored it. And Lawrence Malchos, who's my chief now, he keeps it going. But that console, Queen Night at the Opera, was done on that console.
Oh, God, that's crazy.
In Studio 2 on that Neve, that's David Bowie producing Iggy Pop. You know what I mean? It's
crazy.
It's crazy, right? So consoles kind of we all know they have their own juju. And we've also met people, tell me if you have met these guys, that have bad electronic juju. Like they come into a room and they'll be like, oh God, that guy, whenever he comes in,
everything breaks.
It goes wrong. You know what I mean? It's like bad electromagnetic field.
Everything's
juju.
energy.
You know what I mean?
In your last studio, you said it has a G plus in it, or an E with G? A G plus. Okay.
It has a G plus in it, and it's ironic because that room had a J in it, one of the first J's in it, and Rich Costi, who did a lot of mixes in that room for Rick Rubin, like Audio Slave and all that stuff. I bought the console that we have now from Rich Costi.
Oh, that's cool.
About 6 years ago. We reopened that room 6 years ago.
So let's say there's not a client in sight. How many people does it take on payroll or working in that studio to keep it going? Techs, assistants, runners, management?
Well, like I said, the staff's about 23 people. It's a business. So if there's no session, but
runners, it's 23 people is like what it takes to get that
and the overhead payroll is huge. I mean, the overhead payroll is the biggest chunk of overhead for any business, really, other than a mortgage.
are you finding that it's that there's that your niche, because it's so rarefied air and there's so few studios every day, it's like a bottle of old whiskey, it disappears when somebody opens it? Do you find that because of that you're actually growing in market share and your business is becoming better, or do you see the business slowly going down as a viable business model?
Oh, no, I don't think the business is going down as a viable business model, because of what I've seen several times over the trajectories of my career is people building home studios and then their wives going, get the hell out of here.
Well, I was almost wondering, it's so hard to hang on at your level.
Yeah. And
it's like you might be benefiting from the fact that people are falling off, and it's like you gain market share.
And I that's true. But I never like to see another studio close.
Good for you.
Because to me, it's sort of it's like an indicator, like you're saying, it's an unhealthy indicator. I've been through quite a few stressful ups and downs in my career with the studios that I've managed. One of the main things would be that people don't think they have value. You know what I mean? That's probably one of the toughest things. Or I don't need to do that, especially during COVID. Like, I don't need to do that. I can do it at my house. And thank God I would call people up or have Zoom meetings with people, artists. I mean, we're talking talented artists, and you're thinking like, wow, what are you doing? Why are you putting that into the airwaves?
Yeah.
So I think people want the service.
People do.
We're super competitive. Now, that's one thing. What you're talking about is rates haven't gone up hardly at all in well over 20 years.
I know. I remember that. In fact, I can remember going to Right Track, and if you brought your own tape, they would charge an uncorking fee like they would if you brought your bottle of wine to a restaurant. Yeah. So
I can't do all those nickel and dimey things. I never liked doing those things. I always try to build stuff into the rate. I never liked doing that personally. Me as a manager, that's not my style. But I mean, think about it. I'm running tape right now too. There's a lot of tape being used right now. And that's a whole nother animal. Like, okay, I like ATR, but maybe it's not consistent in formula now. You talk about things that were made on a big, large scale in a big factory, and they were more consistent than they are now in a boutique situation.
Right.
So that's heavy. But yes, I think it's viable. Yes, I see positive growth, partially because some other places have gone away, and you want to be the last man standing kind of thing. But at the same time, I see a real health in the music industry right now. Yeah. I mean, say what you will. I am not a hater against the streaming services. You know what I mean? Content needs to be generated and content needs to be made. I do think the laws need to be changed, how artists are compensated from live stream, but that's happening. It's happening all the time. My husband actually works for the AFM SAG-AFTRA fund that distributes royalties to non-featured performers through the digital streaming services. So all those tiny pennies add up to about $60 million plus a year.
Oh, that's amazing.
If you're a background singer, and he often will reach out to me because he can't find somebody to give them their money. These are government mandated funds. So the money is sitting, waiting.
People don't know that it's there for them.
Yeah, they don't know that it's there for them. So if you're a creator, and I'll say this to anybody watching, if you're a creator and you hand clapped on a song that made it onto terrestrial radio or to a digital streaming service, go to the AFM SAG-AFTRA site and look, because there's probably money waiting for you.
Great point. Hey, thank you. What a great hang this has been.
There's so much more we can talk about.
And we just scratched the surface. We'd love to have you back on. I want to thank Chris Van Tassel for, we were talking before we went live. We don't remember. We think we've gone out to dinner, but we've been like in the same circles around each other for a long time. So thank you, Chris Van Tassel, for reintroducing. And thank you,
Mike.
for
I want to hear more of your stories sometime too.
Okay, yeah.
Such an
I'll come see you next time I'm in LA. I'll come say hello.
Sounds good. Yeah, come see me.
Thanks for being such an open book to us in regards to what that pathway looks like, getting from general assistant. And it's cool to know that it still can happen.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I'll be honest with you.
Make good audio. That's your only job.
That's a great, we need t-shirts that say make good audio.
Right? I mean, that's your only job. And figure out how to do that creatively. Is
there, so we will put a link to East West Studios down below. Is there any other links that you'd like us to put?
No, we'll make sure it gets on our Facebook page, and Real quick thing before we leave, it's very important to utilize social media in an appropriate manner. If you work at a studio like East West, you cannot post anything in real time. You cannot go on Instagram in real time because part of your job is to protect the privacy of the clients. Yes. So we only repost, retweet at what a client has already initiated.
Great point. Awesome. Hey, there's also, we do a part of what we don't put it on our audio stream. We put it on our YouTube account. So we broadcast both video and audio on YouTube, but we have just a regular podcast stream. We don't post it on that regular podcast stream because it's so visual, but we do studio tours. And I have to say, one of the best studio tours I've seen was maybe 3 months ago. I think it was Sound on Sound came out.
Yeah.
Was it Sound on Sound?
Yeah.
It is. We will put a link to that as well. It is one of the finest studio tours I've ever seen.
Son, who was my assistant, is the young man in that tour for Sound on Sound.
Well, he's great.
Yeah.
And it's one of the best coverage when you think about like, hey, how do you show somebody a studio on the internet? It's one of the best coverage, one of the best addressed studio tours. So we'll put a link to that down in the description as well. And hey, if you've got the budget and you've got a great record, wouldn't it be great to have the story that you've worked at East West? So we'll put that link.
Yeah, thank you so very much for your enthusiasm. And anybody that's watching this out there, if you're in some small town somewhere and you think, oh my God, how am I going to do this? I'm in Indiana or wherever I am. Don't lose hope. Find out, go see bands in your hometown. Start small. Start bringing them into your house and start recording them because it's all about the doing.
Yeah. Great point.
Absolutely.
And this is from someone who knows. So, hey, thank you so much. That's it this week from the West Barn. We'll see you next time. Signing off.